hopefully remembering not only D-Day, not only democracy, but also women's suffrage. And in that memory, there is a chance to learn. Good stuff, hard stuff, bad stuff, important lessons about how we can better work together to bend the arc of history towards justice. The good doctor is with us now to talk to us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my delight. Thanks for having me.
What are if you were going to pick, I mean, I hesitate to limit it to one. You can decide whether it's one or three or pick your own number, but the most important lessons of women's suffrage for activists, for people who want to make the current world more just, what would be that lesson, or maybe those lessons?
Well, I am going to take three. Thank you. I think the first one is that history doesn't begin when white people arrive on Turtle Island. That women, indigenous women, and I can point specifically to the Haudenosaunee women of the Six Nation Confederacy in what is now upstate New York, they have had political voice for 1,000 years, while we in the United States next year will be celebrating 100 years of women having a political voice in the United States government. So that's number one. Number two is that we need to take accountability at the same time that we celebrate. I think we typically, in the way that we've commemorated in this country, is that we whitewash the warts. You know, George Washington was awesome. No problems. Jefferson was awesome. No problems. Well, we're beginning to rethink our history and saying, you know, if we hide the truth of the problems as well as the victories, we don't learn from our history. So what can we learn from the suffrage movement history? We can learn that toward the end, after the merger of the two major suffrage organizations in 1890, and it gets progressively worse to 1920, the suffrage movement made the argument, give women the right to vote because white women outnumber Negroes and immigrants, men and women, and woman suffrage is a way to maintain white, native-born supremacy.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
Hugely appreciate the chance to get educated here. Immediate question comes to mind.
Yes.
And I know it's hard to go to motive. I mean, even Kant says go to motive. It's a very hard thing to do. It's hard to guess because motive, you can have more than one. But from your research, from your understanding, how much of that do you think was the essence of the women's suffrage movement, and how much of it was, you know, them being the Lee Atwater of political activism and realizing, well, how are you going to get a whole bunch of white dudes to vote to give, including white dudes in the South, including white dudes in KKK states outside the South? How are you going to get a bunch of white dudes to vote for women's suffrage? How much do you see it as motive, and how much do you see it as just evil, bad, nasty political trick for a virtuous purpose?
Exactly, the latter. Good way of putting it. These were women who knew exactly what they were doing, and they practiced expediency. And I think that's one of the things that we can really look at today. What is the cost if you get your freedom by throwing somebody else under the bus? You may win the battle, but you lose the war for freedom. And that's exactly what happened here. They played to the Southern racists, but did they have to? That was the prevailing mood of the country. But there were African American men who could vote, and the states were denying them that right by passing Jim Crow laws, voter restrictions, and, you know, lynching was a way of voter suppression. The women's suffrage movement, had it made an alliance with African American men. Had they, instead of, and some of the state societies, the auxiliaries, practicing states' rights, they were able to do whatever they wanted. Some of those state auxiliaries worked for the Jim Crow laws. They also worked for the vote for white women only, and they segregated their organizations. That forced African American women to organize on their own. What if they had kept a strong alliance with African American women and men? What if they would have, instead of appealing to the anti-immigrant feeling at the time, what if they had also made a partnership and an alliance politically with immigrant men?
So tease that out. Play alternate historian. Tease that out. Not only a better moral choice, how do you think, offer some scenarios or your leading scenario on what do you think, what if?
I'm sorry, what do I think?
Let's tease that out. Imagine you're writing a book about an alternative universe in which the suffrage movement does work in alliance with people working for, with African Americans working for African American freedom. How do you think, not only there's less toxic ideology spread, but how do you think maybe that plays out? What do you think happens next?
Well, think about this. If we look at the 2016 election and the way that white women voted and the way that African American women voted, think about those women, African American women, who voted overwhelmingly for progress, while white women voted for non-progress and Trump.